Hello. Thanks for joining for our Fulfilling Career Happy Life monthly chat. I'm Randi Roberts. I'm an executive and career life coach, and these are always fun for me because I pick the topic based on themes that I've seen in clients or colleagues. It might be questions that I've gotten, or just topics that have come up during discussion. So it's always kind of fun for me to bring these topics forward and have the discussion. And I appreciate you being here and tuning in for it. So this topic, what we're going to talk about now, is how changing your perspective actually makes you a better leader. And that may sound counterintuitive because as leaders, we are expected to be decisive and clear and sort of always know the path forward. But that's just not always reality. And actually, I'm here to make the case for being willing to change your perspective, being willing to show up without the answer actually makes you a better leader. And this preparing for this was a lot of fun for me because one of the things that I'm really good at that makes me a good executive and leadership coach is that I'm really good at connecting the dots. And what I find is if I'm open to the leadership ideas where they come in, and it strikes you at different times, you may have this experience too, and connecting those dots, it can really help in terms of leadership thinking and whatever. So you'll see what I mean as we get into it. So, again, we may hold ourselves to a standard of having the answer. And I remember in particular when I took on a new big level of leadership, walking into it and feeling like I have no idea what to do. And this is the moment when I really should know what I'm going to do. So this is kind of related to that. And sometimes it's when we do think we know the answer, looking at it in a different way can help our perspective from a leadership standpoint. And just being sure that we know the answer can actually hold us back. So this may give you a permission structure to go forward without knowing what the answer is. Okay, so one of my favorite quotes is so related to this topic today. It's by Wayne Dyer, and it is, "When we change the way we see things, what we see changes." When we change the way we see things, what we see changes. And that goes to, there's a psychological concept called frequency illusion. And what you may know this as the thing, like when you've decided to buy a certain car, like the last car I bought was a Toyota Highlander. And once we had decided that's what we were going to buy, that's what I saw everywhere. And that was really selective attention. Like I honed in on it whenever I saw it. And because I was seeing it more frequently, my confirmation bias came in and I was convinced that everyone was driving this car. Which for some people may lead you to want it more, or may lead you to want to go a different direction. But it's really just the phenomenon of when we have changed the way we see things, what we see changes. And that's really important from a leadership perspective. I mean, perspective isn't just about being optimistic. It's about expanding how we interpret challenges, feedback, even our own leadership style. And it's really just about stopping to think about it. We can unlock better decision making. We can even unlock deeper empathy and much more effective collaboration by being open and asking questions and not being so sure that we have the answer. So think about this. What if the problem isn't the problem? What if the way you're looking at it is the problem, or maybe the way you're not looking at it? I mean, as leaders, we're often taught to act quickly, decisively, move forward quickly, and thinking that that's really efficient. A lot of times it is. But sometimes there's real power in pausing and asking, what else might be true here? What could I be missing? And that shift in perspective can help you respond with curiosity rather than judgment, and help you lead with clarity instead of control. And who wants to be, led by control. I mean, one of the first things, if you ask someone what's the best leader that they work with, like what leadership style works best for them, you will not hear anybody say, I want control and I want to be micromanaged. So why do I want to be that kind of leader? And by being willing to change our perspective and asking what else might be true here, we really can open things up and be the kind of leader that people say they want to follow. Okay, so a couple of points to support this thesis. Perspective really creates awareness. So, you can't change what you can't see. So shifting your perspective really can reveal some blind spots in our thinking, in our strategy, in our behavior. And I mentioned before, like being curious, not judgmental. I think that's a real leadership skill. We don't usually think about curiosity as a leadership skill. And I don't know if any of you out there listening are Ted Lasso fans. I'm a huge Ted Lasso fan. And there's one episode where he talks very much about curiosity rather than being judgmental. He actually attributes the quote to Walt Whitman. And when I looked into it a little bit, he's actually not the one that said it. But I'm quoting Ted Lasso, quoting Walt Whitman, so we can go with it here. But it really is a great leadership skill because you can see different perspectives. You can ask, what if this thing were different? You can plan for different scenarios by being curious, not judgmental. Being judgmental could get you to the end result a little faster, but it won't get you to a better end result. So a question that I get along these lines is, well, how do I know if my perspective is limiting me? If we're talking about it could result in blind spots if we're not willing to change our perspective, how do I know if I have blind spots? And what I would say to that is, if you're even asking the question, it's worth pressure testing it. And that can be as easy as asking someone you trust to tell you that, what they really think. Don't ask a yes person. That might feel good, but it won't necessarily be helpful. Ask someone, it might be someone on your team or someone around you, if they think that you're missing a certain thing or they think there's another way that you can think about something. Talk it out. It always leads to a good place because you may either be then convinced that, okay, you are taking the right path, or you may see things a different way. And another thing that can be helpful is if you feel that there may be value in this for you, is develop a practice of asking yourself, even asking your team, if there's another way we can see this. I remember for a while, there was one team I was leading, and I was seeing a dynamic of the first idea that would come up, that was the one that we followed. And sometimes that led us into a really good place, but sometimes there might be another idea that we should consider. So I started a practice of we have to have at least 3 ideas on the table before we decide which one we would follow. And sometimes it might be, say the challenge was, how are we going to build a bigger market share with this one particular customer base? And it might be we needed new data. Okay, if we were going to pursue that, in the pharma world, that's a long-term payoff, but that's an idea. What was another idea we could pursue? It might be changing up our messaging. Okay, that'd be another idea we could pursue. And then there had to be 3 ideas. If nobody came up with another one, it might be, okay, we're going to take a road trip to Iceland or something and do some brainstorming with the locals there. You can see how ridiculous that is because we don't have a market in Iceland. But then there were 3 ideas on the table and you could see which one was the one to pursue. So, that's a practice you can play with or work with either for yourself or with a team if you're feeling like the perspective needs to be challenged and broadened. Think about a situation where you were recently dealing with something where you felt either stuck or frustrated with the solution that you were trying to come with. You can ask yourself, like, what perspective am I currently holding and what might I be missing? And then maybe you try and look at it through somebody else's eyes. That can open up your thinking. Again, if you have the question whether you need this, assume you do and try something a little bit different. The worst case scenario, you've wasted a little bit of time, which I know is precious, but you may unlock something really powerful. Something that we don't think about sometimes is empathy often begins with perspective, and seeing things through someone else's lens really can build trust, can increase engagement, can improve team dynamics, can open up possibilities we never could have thought about. And I had a really powerful experience going back to connecting the dots, right? Recently, my husband and I were on vacation in Asia. I've never spent time in Vietnam before. It was really, really interesting. And one of the experiences I had that was completely eye-opening was we were in a little village in Vietnam, and a family invited us into their home so we could see how they lived, which was wonderful. I don't speak Vietnamese. They didn't speak English, but we had a tour guide we were kind of working through. And they brought out, in showing us their home, they brought out a military uniform that had all these medals on it. And what they communicated to us through the guide was this was their patriarch, the father of the family who had died a few years before, that they were so proud of because of his heroic service in the Viet Cong. Well, to me, and during the American War, that's what they said. So to me, coming from my American perspective, when I studied the Vietnam War, first of all, we called it the Vietnam War. Of course, they call it the American War. And second, the Viet Cong was the enemy. There were people we couldn't trust. And here they were looking at what I thought of as enemy as hero. And that moment was like really kind of turned everything on its head for me and really brought home this sense that changing our perspective, even looking at it in a different way, considering it, really can open up some things. You may not end up agreeing with the other perspective, but the process of considering it can really open up some possibilities, or even anticipating some obstacles and planning for them that you might encounter. Challenging your assumptions can lead to better decisions. Like when you step back and question your default views, like mine was coming from a very American way of thinking. When you question your default views, you really open the door to more creative and inclusive solutions. It takes a little bit of confidence sometimes as a leader to admit that you don't have the answer, to admit that there might be a better way to think about something. But there's really no downside to it, because as a team, you can come up with an answer that everyone can get behind. Changing your perspective, or being willing to question your perspective, can really help you lead through ambiguity. Seeing a situation from multiple angles can allow us to navigate uncertainty, and really go forward with more clarity and more confidence. I mean, business planning requires you anticipating different scenarios. If you're building a forecast, if you're planning for market events or competitive events, you have to stay open to what's possible and be willing to consider other perspectives. So having that practice in place can really help you do that. Another interesting point is when you as the leader aren't the one who has to be right, who has to have the answer, you really empower the other folks in the room. And valuing those different viewpoints, and that really invites diverse thinking. It invites even a little risk taking in thinking. It's okay for people to, I'll say be wrong. Who knows if they're wrong, but not have the answer that's chosen to move forward. It's if you're inviting that different perspective, it's okay to come up with these different ideas. And one of the beauties of that is these ideas may come up at a time where no one is attached to one yet. And if you become attached to the idea, you're in a position where you have to defend it, and it closes thinking down. So if you're inviting this, mix it up kind of thinking early enough on, people aren't having to defend an idea that they may be willing to walk away from. One of the interesting things from a leadership confidence perspective is having, certainty versus uncertainty. We tend to think certainty is right, but uncertainty is wrong. let's change our perspective on that. It's a question of what are you certain of? As a leader, what your team needs is your certainty that you will find the answer, not your certainty that you have the answer. So you're sort of framing it up for it to be okay for you guys to think about different ideas with the confidence that you will get to the right answer rather than have the right answer. And that in that way, you could tap into your leadership confidence without holding yourself to the standard of having the right answer. Think about a time when you worked for a boss who was always right. Or maybe you had a colleague, or you've seen this in others. But like, what happens? It shuts people down. You develop a culture of people waiting to be told what to do. And people over time can lose their problem solving and their sort of creative edge and lose some of their motivation. So if that happens, essentially they become a person that is not the person that you hired and that can't contribute at the level that you want them to. And you may have created that situation. So, what will happen then to those people? Oftentimes, either the boss changes, which happens in corporations. It's not necessarily a bad thing, but somebody new with a different perspective comes in. And if that doesn't happen and they get shut down, lose motivation, and are self-aware, they will leave. So that control actually is harder for you as a leader. So there's every reason to be a little bit more open about it, and really, not hold on to being right, hold on to your commitment to collectively come up with the answer that's best given the situation. Openness and curiosity. I talked about curiosity before, but openness and curiosity kind of go together, and it really fuels growth. A leader who actively seeks new perspectives in yourself, in others, you cultivate that culture of learning and innovation, which is what we all need. Our world is changing, and it's changing fast in different ways, in different situations. But that culture of learning and innovation can really increase the impact that we all have. So some questions that I've gotten along about this topic, what's the difference between changing your perspective, being willing to change your perspective or question it, and being either indecisive or inconsistent? And this is a question that can often come up with folks who are in new leadership positions or in positions of increased leadership. And it kind of goes to that confidence, that leadership confidence that we want to have. We may hold ourselves to maintaining clarity and direction. And so just asking the question is important because it can give you permission or a reminder maybe to open up your perspective, look at things differently, and value that as a strength and not a weakness. My own coach talks a lot about narrating the situation. And this might be a good time to do that. You may want to talk to your team about the fact that, wait a minute, let's think about this in a different way. Let's take a minute to think about whether we are considering all perspectives. I mean, one of the things that I used to do when I was in the corporate world was, and I would narrate it. I would say, wait a minute, let me think out loud for a minute, and we'll see where it goes. And I would let them know this wasn't a fleshed out thought. This was sort of a thought journey. And I was willing to do that because it helped take them along on my thought process. A lot of times it led to a good place. If it didn't, it was 30 seconds, 45 seconds of their lives they'd never got back. I could apologize for wasting that time, but it made it okay for them to do the same thing. So sometimes me going on that thought journey would take us to a good place. And there were times that I remember saying, yeah, this didn't lead us anywhere. Let's move on. And that's okay too. It made it okay for them to have that thought journey and see where it led. Another question that I get sometimes is, how can I encourage my team to shift their perspective without undermining their confidence or their autonomy or sending them the message that I think they're wrong? And, this really goes to your desire to promote that culture of growth and critical thinking without micromanaging or causing resistance. going back to, if it works for you, developing a practice of, okay, before, talking to your team, before we follow this too far, is there another perspective we should be thinking about? Is there a way that we could think about this differently? Maybe how would our competition be thinking about this? So, that just develops a practice of, let's think about it a different way before we decide and move forward. If you have that practice in place, your people won't take it personally. Actually, you might have to help them through it at first, because sometimes people need a little bit of, different people are different. Some people have a real thick skin and they'll move along. Other people may not have that level of confidence, maybe in a new role. They might need you to help them through it a little bit, sometimes after the meeting and processing it. But eventually they'll just see that that's your commitment to making sure all perspectives are considered. It's not that they are wrong. A final question that I've gotten is, how can I hold space for multiple perspectives when I still need to be the one to make the final decision, or I may need to be the one? Sometimes you as boss have to exercise veto power or lead the team in a different direction. The process of considering the different perspectives is still really valuable, but this kind of speaks to the tension between being inclusive and being decisive. And that's something that we as leaders really navigate regularly. And again, goes to that confidence of not holding yourself responsible for being right. And you can bring out the different perspectives in a group, consider them as a group, decide whether to move forward. Sometimes the group isn't where you are, and there might be reasons that you need to move it forward in a different direction. I have seen some really effective leaders who have built who have earned the respect of their team. Just, say to the group, look, I've heard everybody out. We're going to have to go in this direction, and here's why. I need you to trust me a little bit on this one. And sometimes, that if you're willing to take them along with you, it's not that you're bowling over them, but sometimes you do need to exercise that veto power, and then make sure you're being more inclusive with the implementation of the decision, even if you had to be a little, what may feel like heavy-handed, and leading them in a different direction. Okay, so you'll have to let me know whether I've convinced you or not that having an open perspective actually strengthens your leadership, builds more followership. As leaders, we often look outward at different strategies and metrics and performance, but sometimes the most powerful shift is actually inward, and questioning whether we're right or whether there's another way to look at it. Changing our perspective is not about being wrong. It's about being open. It's about being open to growth, to the perspective of others, to a deeper kind of leadership that comes from humility and vision and, willingness to take the ideas of others, the curiosity. I think all of those things are really important leadership skills. And so what I want to leave you with rather is, the next time you feel stuck or misunderstood or disconnected, don't push harder. Pause, take a step back, and change your lens. Ask if there's another way you can look at it, because maybe the obstacle that you're encountering is really just your own perspective. Going back to what I said at the beginning, which is, maybe the problem isn't the problem. The problem is the way that you're looking at it. And really, all of this, makes you stronger as a leader, because how you see will always shape how you lead. And you'll be the leader that other people want to follow. So let me know what you think. Let me know what's been helpful about this. Let me know if something has helped you connect the dots. And as always, let me know if there's something you disagree with, because again, maybe there's an aspect of this that I could change my lens. I'm always eager to do that. So wish you all a wonderful week, and thank you again for listening, and I'll see you soon.